All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Aashima, and I'm one of the editors at the Labhopping Science Media Forum, or the lifeofscience.com. I hope you're feeling safe as much as it is possible to do so today in the heat of the ongoing escalations around us. And I'm myself in Himachal, in a place which is about 5 to 6 hours away from the border near Pathankot, which I learned this morning is Asia's biggest military base, and is also one of the targets of the ongoing escalations between India and Pakistan militaries. Yeah, I'm trying to keep myself informed. I'm doing okay, but I have to say that I have this nagging knot in my stomach building up. I'm not recently, it's been 2 years, but I'm a new parent. So I've spent the last few days doing, contingency plans in my head, preparing in that way. And, I know it's not realistic, but still that fear is there. So yeah, I had to switch that off and bring myself to my mind HumanIITs. Human IITs. It's hard to say, but it looks good when you read it. And this is the name that we call the collaboration with the research group StemTheGap at IIT Delhi. And today we are here to talk about something that seems like it's far away from current affairs. But as I thought about a bit more about it, I realized that in fact it has everything to do with it. I reminded myself in preparing for this that of what has been said of the scholarship of contemporary critics of science and technology, about the misuse or an overuse of technological progress in the acts of war today around the world. We are in the day of the drone strike and the powerful fighter jet, and we have the vantage point to now clearly see how science and technology are deeply immersed in wars and harm. And even though it seems very crucial to have this advanced technology, it's important to also open our eyes to the fact that globally, military spending that is aimed at causing harm to human life is disproportionately favored in science funding budgets of almost all countries, India, of course, included. But I'm going to keep it simple and stress instead on the importance to have a critique, to continue and keep it going and deepen it in the hope to bring reform and progress to how we are doing the science. I will read just a short intro to an article written by Devika Sethi I read yesterday, who is an assistant professor at IIT Mandi in the Humanities and Social Sciences. And she writes in the Indian Express, whereas engineers are taught to think in terms of solutions, HSS courses enable them to problematize the world around them. This involves appreciating the complexity of the world around us and within us. So with an ode to that complexity, I want to introduce first and foremost a senior person in this field in HSS Humanities in India, a pioneer and accidental IITian, a tempered radical, in her own words, Professor Ravinder Kaur, who I had the good fortune to speak with a couple of hours for the profile and interview, which we kind of launched this Humanities series with on the life of science. And Ravinder leads the StemTheGap project at IIT Delhi, and that is the group that we collaborated with recently to come out with a few pieces looking at the context and the findings of the work. So Ravinder Kaur, please would you open the panel just with a few opening statements, and then we will go around with the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Aashima. I think you started with a very crucial and important statement. And these are things that we in the humanities departments think about all the time. Um, as you would know, the humanities departments in the IITs are as old as the IITs themselves. So there's a legacy of about 60 plus years. And it was, in the very foundation of the IITs. And I regret to say there were only founding fathers. No mothers were included. I wish there had been. I'm sure they were around. And basically, the idea was to provide a holistic education to the young students who were joining to become engineers. And that's because, the founders also had that breadth of vision that science and technology were embedded in society and it was and were expected to function in society. So it was important for the students to be acquainted with what the humanities and the social sciences uh, could knowledge that they could impart upon the functioning of society, culture, thought, etc. So I would just say, so we have multiple disciplines. There's literature, psychology, sociology, economics, linguistics. These have been some of the traditional disciplines. Many of the second and third generation IITs are now innovating and coming up with great hybrid programs as well. IITs have also moved into the spaces of public policy, management, and programs in cognitive sciences where there is interdisciplinarity between the sciences and between technology and humanities and social sciences. I would also say that, in the last 10, 15 years, the departments have become much more impactful and they have begun to make a difference to the intellectual perspectives of the students at IIT. So I think they are deepening the understanding of the world that these students graduate with through the multiple disciplines and the courses that they teach. They've also, apart from reflections on science and technology itself, which are crucial, for example, AI is a very big area today. Ethics is a very big question. So philosophy is very, very important for understanding ethics. And, going out, innovating anything has to be an inclusive process. It has to bring in as many voices as is possible, which was not the case in the past. But I think the humanities and social sciences departments also, bring this to the attention of their managements. I'll just, close with a couple more sentences that these departments have also created the space for what you can call difficult conversations. You mentioned the difficult conversation on science and technology. I would add, to gender identities, caste, disability, and the institutes have become much more proactive on taking these on board. I mean, one, it's pushed by circumstances. Other, I think, for example, we have far more women in senior leadership now, post the Gati project, which maybe we can come back to in the conversation at some point of time. But there is greater sensitization, and so the impact is also greater. Sometimes the backlash is also greater as one progresses, but that is kind of inevitable. I think I'll stop here because we have colleagues who are also have been students, and there are other colleagues who are at other IITs who will also, I'm sure, pitch in into this conversation.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Ravinder. I will go to now Abhilasha. I want to introduce her. She was one of the collaborators in the project we did recently, and she wrote one piece on the supernumerary schemes and how the work of StemTheGap in that area. And Abhilasha, who is a principal project scientist, drives the overall strategy for the project and leads the verticals of dissemination and influence to change both within and outside the institute. She graduated from IIT Delhi in 2012 and has an MBA from Harvard and has a decade-long career in tech startups and innovation. Abhilasha, please tell us about your thoughts about, being through the IIT system and coming back to study it, and what do you think?
Thank you, Aashima. And I think, just getting started, a lot of the experience of coming back has been to see just what it is like to make the STEM ecosystem more not just welcoming, but thriving for women in particular. And this becomes close to heart because when I studied at IIT Delhi, I was one of 4 women in the mechanical engineering department of 100. And that was considered our highest peak number for mechanical engineering. And since then, across the board in startups, in innovation in the boardroom, while the ratio has sort of sometimes been better, sometimes been worse, but it's still been one that you've still been the odd one out or the minority character there. So just hearing about the supernumerary scheme and seeing the fact that it's now shifted the ratio to 20%, like I think and we'll discuss the article at a later point. For me, it's like just visibly I see more women on campus, whereas when I was there as a student, you had to look out and spot because I was really, it was a very different ratio back then. I want to, I think, briefly right now just begin by sharing some of my points of view on the role of humanities in sciences, or rather just interdisciplinary education. So my own career has been very interdisciplinary in nature. I've worked in tech, often, sometimes even in cutting edge tech, as well as science, commercialization of science, from a business tech product perspective. And I think the best thing and I often attribute this ability to switch context, to really be able to bridge these different worlds, to the fact that my undergraduate degree had a lot of exposure to the humanities. And to policy, and to really think about technology in that context. And in many ways, I'm actually very glad that it was a part of the formative years. So you were thinking about different types of sort of and I was a mechanical engineering student, so let's say if you're thinking about energy, you're thinking about renewable energy, nuclear energy, just at the same time being introduced to themes around like philosophy, sociology, just seeing the broader impact. It was a very good timing. I think the undergraduate degree is a good timing to build these complementary skills, and that ends up becoming very relevant in the years to come. So personally, as a professional, that has been a game changer. And I think secondly, even as somebody who's like hired and several people over the years and built teams, I think that just in today's age, where a lot of information is commoditized, it becomes even more relevant to be able to have these skills to cut across different disciplines, to bring that perspective in. So yeah, I think both from a person as an individual, but also across the board, as you think about building teams and organizations that can tackle some of the most complex problems of the world today. I think it's just that interdisciplinary approach is just not just a good to have, it's critical.
Thank you. So it's good to hear that there is progress just in your local area of IIT Delhi, and that you see it coming back, and you can already connect it to your exposure to the humanities while you were undergrad. And yeah, I'd love to hear about what you thought about writing the piece, reflecting on the work that is done. But before that, please let me introduce Raunaq, who is also one of the team members at StemTheGap and also one of the authors of the collaboration that we did with StemTheGap. And Raunaq Saraswat, the project scientist, is a freelance journalist and a learning designer for early childhood interventions. His research interests are located at the intersection of migration, affect, and the city. He studied at IIT Delhi and Ashoka University. Raunaq, please tell us about your thoughts of being in this location academically.
Right. Thank you so much, Aashima, for the introduction. I think in building on from what Abhilasha said in terms of how the impact has unfolded in, let's say, in her career in the past 10 years, I graduated more recently. So I was a student at IIT until 2022. And ours was incidentally the first batch when the supernumerary scheme came into being. So in some ways, it is almost like coming a full circle, because things that I'm reading or seeing in the research papers, or something that I even wrote about in the spatial study of campus, was always spoken of, but it was never substantiated, because these things passed around as either legends or anecdotes or experiences. But now one sees them in the form of robust and credible research, which is both critical, because you have evidence of the shortcomings which an institute has, or the biases and discrimination which is so integrated and almost concretized in the infrastructure, as we will talk about later. So in terms of research, I do think this is a coming of full circle, but I also want to touch upon a couple of things vis-a-vis the humanities courses and the humanities departments. I think you already spoke of it in your opening remarks, but a lot of the courses that people end up doing at STEM institutes and IITs in particular, because we are specifically talking about them, tend to be in binaries, where you are either learning about one thing and the outcome is more critical, it becomes about the grades or the GPAs, and this is what sort of dominates your experience at an IIT. What humanities courses provide, I think, to my mind, is a different form of knowledge altogether, and also a different mode of learning. Something which doesn't become available in, let's say, a disciplinary course if you are studying just engineering. And that helps in just expanding the way in which you think about the world. So I think the impact unfolds, of course, as you go higher up in your career, but just in your conception, the way you view the world, the way you think of problems, and the complexity, as you spoke of in your earlier quote, how much you are able to attribute that complexity to something that you're looking, is what a humanities course brings. And this is something which I think has happened. I mean, I pretty much digressed from what I studied in engineering, and I'm moving towards social sciences. So there are a lot of people who also pick these traces in their careers more directly, in the sense that they gravitate towards it. And yeah, I mean, the progress has started to happen, as I think Abhilasha and Professor Kaur hinted, but there are small baby steps which we're all taking towards it.
Yes, truly. Thank you, Raunaq. I want to invite now Swati, who's also a project scientist, principal project scientist at StemTheGap, and she focuses on quantitative research. She works in the domain of personnel, behavioral, and experimental economics with a focus on social networks, gender, and caste. Prior to joining the team, she was a postdoctoral fellow at IIT Delhi. She received her PhD in quantitative economics from IIT Delhi. Please, Swati, tell us about this. Why is this expanding of the horizons in a STEM institute so important from your perspective?
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Aashima, for inviting me. So I'm Swati, and as she has already told, I'm a quantitative economics, and we deal with data, empirics, and numbers. So when I joined this project, and which had a focus, and I come from a sort of a feminized kind of institute, which were also quite gender sensitive. So for me, a lot of issues were never heard of. And it was very interesting when we figured out the themes and the topics we wanted to work on, and we tried to access data. So first, you have to convince people at the institute that, okay, these questions are worth studying, they are important. And then there is the whole tussle of getting access to data. And trying to make it participatory, having so yeah, so there were all these challenges which we tried to overcome in this project. And what really helps is when you show numbers, when you back anecdotal evidences with context, then you can make some impact. You can help people see things beyond their experiences. You can help them see bigger picture. So that's also one of the objectives of our project, that we are trying to bring a bigger picture, bring a using nuances of research, different research techniques. We are trying to show, these are the trends, these are the areas which need fixing, and so this kind of interdisciplinary or humanities kind of helps in identifying the problem, then making it visible, and then working towards policy relevance, which let's say STEM Institute, because they are focused on science and technology, they may not have time also to widen their perspective in that sense. So that kind of intersection really helps.
Yeah. Ravinder, can I go on from here and ask you, in the light of what Abhilasha, Raunaq, and Swati have said, about specific ways and techniques to do this kind of work, can you tie it in and tell us exactly what StemTheGap's intended to do and what it has been doing, and tell us about specifically why and what research questions you're going after?
Thanks, Aashima. So, our project started with concerns about the IITs, our own institutes, given the very stark gender gaps that these institutes have, whether it was students, before the supernumerary scheme, it was 8% in the BTech degree for 60 years, or, little less than that maybe. And among the faculty, the percentage is about 15% and 13% actually. And scientific staff, our study for IIT Delhi found out were only about 7%. And if we go to leadership, again, women may be given soft positions, but they will not be made like deans of planning or important positions that shape policy much more in the institute. So we saw these stark gender inequalities, and I've been teaching there for nearly three decades now. So somewhere, I'd also started these courses on gender and society, gender technology and society, also taught sociology of development, sociology of India. And so I think I really wanted to address the issues of women in STEM, gender in STEM, look at the, biases and barriers that they faced towards a full inclusion in the STEM world. And we thought, as my colleagues have pointed out, that a systematic study, a research-backed project, which would have the goal of designing a gender inclusion framework, was, what we had presented as our idea to the people co-impact Gender Equality Fund who funded us. So we started with that. And I think Raunaq will show a slide maybe. So we designed our studies, our research questions and our research studies along the, let's say, life cycle of a female scientist, which you see here up on the screen. So we had actually started with entry, like entering institutions like IITs or NITs or ICERs, etc. But then we realized that the pre-entry also mattered. How women's, girls, interests in science, technology are shaped or not shaped was also very crucial. And so we've done some studies on that. Then we kind of pose a lot of questions at the entry point, which has to do with the exams, like the JEE, etc., which people need to take to get into IITs. So we've been trying to understand whether these exams possibly might be gender biased in themselves in some ways. We have work to share on that, but I'll not go into it right now. And then the whole entry, for example, for that, we have extensively studied the supernumerary seat scheme from several perspectives, from the quantitative, the qualitative, because the qualitative helps to thicken, the narratives of the women who have joined the IITs after the initiation of the supernumerary seat scheme. What has been their experience? And we have interesting findings on that as well. Then we kind of, have also posed questions around experience of faculty, experience of students. We've shaped studies around the PhD cohort of PhD postdoc cohort, which is crucial to staying in STEM. And we find most of the literature finds that there is a drop-off after PhD. We have a fairly decent number of women doing PhD at the IITs, about 37%. But then we find that they kind of disappear and are not found in the work world, which is about maybe 14% women in STEM. So what happens to these highly qualified women? So retention, this is a question about retention also. Also we have taken so retention and then leadership. We've taken a multidisciplinary approach, qualitative studies, quantitative studies. The qualitative studies are sociological studies, but we've also worked with digital humanities, and we've also worked with spatial studies. And all these together have shed a lot of light, these approaches on not only barriers and biases, but also we are looking at what can be done in terms of policy interventions, in terms of steps that institutions can take place and we can take. And we hope to build a complete gender inclusion framework, which can be adopted by other institutions because it would be research backed. So, so I'll stop here and maybe, ask other colleagues to join in, and maybe Aashima would like to ask another question.
Yes, yes. Just staying on the topic on StemTheGap research questions specifically, I want to ask Abhilasha to come in and talk about the participatory methods that are used to go after these questions and how's the work done, and specifically maybe if you could throw light, although briefly, on of the different questions that you worked on.
Sure. And I think a lot of the participatory work builds on the research, that's already been done or is ongoing via multiple methods, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, spatial. Our goal is to take whatever are the research findings that are coming and then seeing how that can be translated into institutional policies, ongoing initiatives. So, one of the very direct examples is, as you see, we talk about pre-entry. So pre-entry is how do you shape the aspirations of girls coming into the, as they think about, in the high school girls, as they think about careers in STEM. And one of our approaches in participatory work is often to balance like long-term change with quick wins. And often the quick wins are aligned with ongoing work that different departments within IIT are already undertaking, right? That helps to build the momentum, helps to sort of have a proof of concept, and that really makes it easier to then bring in deeper change. So at the pre-entry level, we have the Office of Outreach and New Initiatives, which already, has been running an outreach program for high school girls for the last 3 years. And a lot of our participatory work there was working closely with bringing the research insights in terms of what are the gaps that girls face, how do we make these programs, what is the role of these programs, how can they be more impactful, and then working very closely with each office to make sure that we're able to provide feedback, provide inputs in program design, and then eventually have a playbook in place so that this can be scaled year on year and it doesn't end up being a flash in the pan. So that's kind of a great example of participatory work where, as a quick win, we will sort of take some of our findings from the research, take themes like the dream gap, the role of parents, etc., and then bring that into an ongoing program and work very closely with the, with the leaders of the institution. And over time, as we learn, we're able to codify that for the institution. And then eventually, as ma'am said, we'd want to, Professor Kaur said, we'd want to make a broader gender inclusion framework, which other institutions can also sort of learn and benefit from. So that ends up being the life cycle of any participatory research project. I think one of the other takeaways that we've also had is that if we sort of distill the takeaways for the relevant sort of leadership body, those end up becoming much more relevant. And just like thinking about what is important to them, what isn't, that helps to translate it into real change. So that's been a lot of the effort with our participatory work within the IITs, and like hopefully going forward within IIT Delhi, and then of course going forward with other institutions as well.
Right. So I just, while you're talking about how the research work goes up straight into policy and how there is maximum engagement of the leadership and of just the initiatives that are ongoing at the institute, I want to also ask you specifically about how involved, like, and in what way are the students interacting with this work?
Sure. And so this varies across different projects, different sort of, sub-projects that we take up. Pre-entry has probably limited involvement from current students because it's way more targeted towards high school girls that IIT Delhi is doing an outreach towards. But of course, the students come in there, but in other things, and like Raunaq will discuss this in a bit, one of our takeaways was about how spaces can play a huge role in sort of either encouraging a lot of intermingling or could be prohibitive in nature. And in that case, that's an example which is very much directed towards the student community. There is a lot of there's a lot of engagement from them because the goal is to make it as community input driven as possible. So I'll let Raunaq take that up in more detail. But I think just to sort of close out the theme of the participatory work, along with just looking at where who could truly be implementing these the findings from the research, we also spend enough time and thought about translating this research into dissemination or information that a wider audience can process, right? And that includes the student community, it includes the leaders and the administrators and faculty, and of course, forums like this. Like, we're very grateful for the people who've joined today, and our goal is to sort of kick off that conversation. So those end up becoming the two legs of the participatory work we do, where there's direct influence to change, and then also dissemination and like conversation from which is research backed in nature.
Right. That's very interesting. I will ask Raunaq now to go deeper and tell us specifically about the specialty work and how it was done. And would be great, Raunaq, if you can also talk about how you went about writing the piece, which I can share on the screen that you wrote on the lifeofscience.com. So I want to know how the work was done, your critical thoughts about this side of the research, this method, and also about like how you went about presenting it and what you had to choose, what is important to talk about in the article and what wasn't.
Right. Are you presenting it, or should I share a part of my screen?
You can start talking and I'll share it, so then you don't have to bother.
Got it. Okay. So I'll also just quickly extend what Abhilasha was just talking about in terms of our participatory work, in the sense that a lot of the work that we do with students, just to respond to your question, we also try to hear from them from time to time. So either be it in the form of a focus group discussion or a town hall, or very recently we conducted a participatory design exercise where we are thinking of redesigning some of our common spaces. And it will become very clear as to why we want to redesign common spaces, but we ask students and members of community at large, which includes faculty, staff, students, everybody, to come and share their suggestions with us. And this also happens in a very structured and sort of predefined manner. And then we become a mediator between those voices and the people who happen to be in positions of authority and decision-making roles, so as to how can they go about realizing those ideas and what could be the mechanisms and steps they should follow. So that's just one tidbit on what more do we do on participatory work and how students are involved. But coming back to this article, so if you go to the title of this piece, it reads two campuses within one. And the whole sort of concept of this piece and the research which was conducted by Professor Kaur, yeah, I think somebody's asking for the link. We'll share it on the chat also. But just to give a sense of where the sort of title came from and what it represents, the idea is that a campus is composed of people of varying identities. We are here looking at gender. And what the research found out was that the experiences of men and women on campus, male and female students, were not identical. They were not similar. In fact, they were defined by their gender identities. They were defined by how the institute space was structured, what the infrastructure of institute was. And this had a history because IITs were started 70 years back, when these conversations were not happening, when they were largely composed of men and male students. But this also has very contemporary rings to it as to what is happening now and how are people sort of negotiating with it, and how does it percolate into the social life, the academic life, and the professional life also of people who sort of stay on these campuses. I'll talk a little about the sort of method and what we found out. So essentially what we did, or what the research did, Professor Kaur and Kushdeep, who's not here, who was a geographer who helped us conduct this entire research, was that we spoke to students. We asked them to sketch their everyday movement. So about 80 students were asked to sketch the places they went to. So these are some of the sketches that you see on your screen right now, the places that they went to on a daily basis, and also mark the activities they sort of participated in those places. So be it leisure, be it socialization, be it formal work, be it informal work, be it networking, where networking simply means talking to your peers, talking to your seniors, getting to know of opportunities, exchanging ideas. And this was then divided and analyzed for the gender identity of a student. And what we found out then, I think, becomes interesting, which I'll come to very soon. But beyond these sketches, we also spoke to students and spoke to other stakeholders of the institute, the deans of infrastructure, the project engineers, who play a very integral role in designing the infrastructure and how the infrastructure comes to be, and what is the thinking of the administration behind shaping an IIT infrastructure and what it has been. So with this method and with this sort of context, what we found out essentially was that when you look at a layout of an IIT, old IIT in particular, the hostels of men and women, male and female hostels, are very far away from each other. So the distance could be somewhere from a mile or somewhere between 1.5 miles. And this distance sort of distinguishes the kind of experiences and the mobility male and female students have. So when you look at the boys' hostels or residences for men, they are also surrounded by sporting and recreational facilities, something which doesn't exist for women because their hostels are very close to the academic area. So it's almost as if the institute is, the infrastructure of the institute is nudging them to take part in academics, and the distance deters them to sort of juggle between recreation, going to a sporting ground, and just doing other informal sort of activities which a student does. So this was a large sort of idea that the location of the hostels is what determines the mobility, and this is something which has been based and has been hinging on the gender identities. One sort of critical finding here, for instance, was that when you look at the radius of mobility of male and female students, for a female student, it would typically be 500-meter when around her hostel, while no such boundary or limit would apply to a male student. And all of this is also compounded by a diffusing of these gender identity. And by that I essentially mean that a lot of students who we spoke to told us that the campus also has an inherently masculine culture because of how it has been designed, because of the strength of male students, and how it's still overly populated by men. And all of this percolates into different realms. So something as simple as it is easier for male students to collaborate amongst each other because their hostels are so close and they're segregated from female hostels, or how the kind of hostel spirit or this collective assertion which happens at a lot of IITs is more when it comes to men's hostels. And this is something which goes missing when it comes to the female peer groups or the women's hostel. And all of this shapes up the experiences they have. And the one thing to sort of note here is that while all of these things have been evidenced in the research, they have a history to it, as I was talking about. So at one point, we quote a project engineer, and he told us that IITs were designed at a point where there were very few women coming to these institutes. So the hostels of women were at a place where they were close to the administration or the staff, so as they could be made to feel secure. And this is a practice which has continued for very, very long, and we see sort of the effects of it as of now. But apart from the research, coming to the other question of yours, Aashima, as to how I sort of wrote this research or what I was thinking while putting these pieces together, I think one critical aspect was to not lose out on the gravity of what we had found out while keeping it lucid, while putting it together as a narrative, because there was a lot of theoretical underpinning of what we were doing, how space is affected by social identities, what's the history, the methods that we had found out, but we also had to make it more accessible for let's say a lay audience or a well-meaning audience. So I think just constructing that narrative was one of the central ideas, which also meant that some of the other voices from the ecosystem and the stakeholders had to be included. So if you read the piece, you will find the mention of a project engineer, the dean who we had spoken to, and you also find more context in terms of what the institute is now doing to course correct. So while all of this can also give a very bleak picture, there are strides as we are speaking which are being taken in terms of correcting this, building gender responsive infrastructure, or initiating the kind of participatory design exercise. So two essentially things while rewriting or sort of inscribing this piece which I took care of was just contextualizing it and turning everything that we had found out through research into something which was lucid and something which had a narrative element and a narrative tenor to it. And everybody is welcome to engage with the piece. It is there on the chat, and there are also maps, so it's also a mix of visual and text. So I hope you have a good time reading it, if you have not read it.
Yes. And if you have had a good time, you can have a good time another time by reading it. I'm sure it'll reveal something new. It's a great piece. I really enjoyed working on it. And I want to also encourage now the audience, while you're processing all of this information, looking at the pieces, if something comes up to your mind, please throw us a comment in the chat, ask a question, which we will take up then at the end. I'm hoping we will finish our panel at 5 so we can open for questions in about 12 minutes. So you're very welcome to ask questions, ask doubts, anything, any clarifications, any information that you would like from the panelists or from the Labhopping team. I want to now call on Swati and ask her to tell us about this data analysis and numbers that you stressed on in your opening comments. You said that it helps, and it definitely does. For sure, even in my own work, talking about the gender gap in Indian science community, just talking about the faculty numbers, talking about the biases, it has been very prominent. This backlash always comes in the shape of, where are the numbers? Give us the numbers. And what is excellent about this work is that you're actually doing all of that interesting work. And if you could respond to this by getting into the supernumerary schemes, your work on supernumerary schemes, and I can share the screen and show the other article that we worked on while Swati is talking about this work. Please, Swati.
Yeah, so, okay. So as Professor Ravinder Kaur mentioned that in the project, we are following the life cycle approach where, you see that at every stage there are barriers which make women drop out from. So if you will see that there are if you look at class 12th, there are about like 40 plus, like 40% plus females enrolled in STEM courses. But as you look at BTech programs and you look at tenured professors. So if you look at this range, you will see very fewer women, especially in the institute like IITs. So in the project, we are working on all these different stages, and we have qualitative studies, we have quantitative studies, which tries to, not only look at the problems, but also at the enablers. So what also helps women move forward. So supernumerary seat scheme is one of, it's a landmark scheme that helped um, women enter the institute. So the scheme broadly, it creates extra seats in programs where female proportion was not 20%. So in a way, it provides leg up. It's um, so are you sharing the supernumerary piece?
Yeah, I'm just about to.
Okay, so how we started on was trying to look at the scheme, trying to understand what the scheme is, what does it do, how does it help women to get in, and so in first set of research, we just looked at the what scheme was doing. So the scheme, and we conclude that the scheme has been quite successful, and it has helped um, to help women to enroll in IITs in selective programs where they have been historically left out due to various reasons. Then we also move on and we look at data, and we find that the girls who are coming after supernumerary seat schemes, they are able to catch up. They, even though they enter with poorer ranks, they exit with better ranks. So by the end of their journey in BTech courses, they are able to match up, they are able to catch up, and they exit with much better ranks. There are many nuances to our studies, and everyone is welcome to look at the papers in details and ask us questions. So these are then we also have a qualitative study where we interviewed female and male students, where we try to see that what what do they feel about this scheme and what kind of perceptions or myth it creates. So um, yeah, so this is from the IGES report. So no, okay. So
Sorry,
yeah, so
I had to stop sharing. And do you want to share your own screen and show something
no.
specific, or okay?
No, it's okay. I can just talk about it. There are links to the paper and we can share.
Yes.
So, like I said, that we have found out that the scheme has been successful at the extensive margin. Maybe I'll spend 2 lines on what the scheme is. So the
Yeah.
scheme creates extra seats. It took seats of the gender proportion that existed in 2017. It kept the boy seats fixed, and then there were calculations done that how many extra seats were to be added for females, which were the supernumerary seat scheme. So there were programs, there are newer IITs where there was actually no need of supernumerary seat scheme. So there is this heterogeneity in the implementation of the scheme, which a lot of people don't understand, or where there is let's say there's not much clarity also available if you try to look try to find out what the scheme is about. So yeah, so that's the first nuance that struck us. that the it's heterogeneous at the program level. So there have been certain courses like mechanical, like electrical, where extra seats had to be created, let's say across all older IITs, because these uh, programs were historically male dominated, and females didn't get through or they didn't opt. So it could be because of various reasons. Then we also conducted a nuance analysis of what was happening to girls after supernumerary, because when any sorts of affirmative action comes, there is always concern of quality or of students not being able to catch up or students dropping out midway. So we sorts of our data analysis totally debunks all these myths, and we show that the girls who are, even though due to supernumerary, they come through lower ranks because that's what the affirmative action does, but they are able to catch up. In fact, these girls they take lesser time to graduate actually. So, so that's one study that we have done. Then we also have we have a semi-structure. We had like series of semi-structured and structured interviews with students, male and female, and we try to understand what kind of perception exists in the campus. What do students feel about this affirmative action? And yes, there are certain negative perception as well that some people look at it as a girls' quota, whereas it is not a quota. It's quite different from how quota works. And that we have explained in our papers in details. And then there is acceptance also. A lot of people understand that it is a corrective measure that needs to be taken, at least in short run. So girls do feel like they do get the feeling of imposter syndrome, but we have quantitative data that is showing that they are catching up, they are performing as good as other boys. So we do need to highlight these key findings also, and hopefully that the piece we have worked with you will help in breaking some of these perceptions about this scheme. And
yeah, well, I think it's also a great piece because like you said, it's a very complex thing that was done. I mean, it's not that complex actually, but it seems very complex because it is. I mean, I'm not sure if it's unprecedented, if it hasn't happened before, this model, but it is new and it's at such a wide scale at all the IITs. And today we do know that the proportion of girls has gone to 20%, which was the aim of the scheme. And it has happened. I mean, now we've stopped at 20%. So what I didn't really see in the piece, honestly, was some kind of critique of it. I mean, of course, you're reporting the realities of, this feeling that has been very common in the case of the caste quota, right, where people are even, there is a lot of discrimination bias in the narrative of quota and undeserved admission. And the girls now are also feeling that. So I want to really wrap up now, and since we have limited time and already there are hands up and people who have put their hands up, I request you to please wait 4 more minutes. We have 4 panelists. I'm going to each give them 1 minute to close, and then we will hear all your great questions. So I want to go around now and go back. So let's start with Swati, and then we go to Raunaq, Abhilasha, and Ravinder in the end, to really open up and tell us what is the future of this kind of work in the context of having humanities research, social sciences research inside the institution. You have done this work and there has been policies, and you've been trying very hard to engage with all the people involved at various levels to really engage with this reality, and you've done reflective work of the initiatives. But what have we learned then in all of this, where other programs, or just even this program in its next avatar, in its next cycle, in its next funding round, what will be different? What have we not covered? What are we overlooking? And what has been the challenges? Swati, your 1 minute, please.
So I think Abhilasha is the right person to answer this question. I'm going to answer from a researcher point of view because that's my domain. So I would say that we have conducted a lot of behavioral experiments. We have conducted field experiments with students, and we do see that they are marred by their own anecdotal evidence. And it's interesting when you do these kind of interventions. It's interesting to see how they respond to behavioral experiments like some sort of an intervention. It helps. So like we recently conducted a field study where we randomized people into team of 3 and we varied the gender ratio. So it was so there might have been students like males who have or females, they must have never interacted with each other and they interacted, and this helps in bringing people together to break certain barriers, myths. So I do see that through our research, we not only, do a quantitative analysis, but we also induce some sort of a behavioral change. And hopefully, like these experiences are carried forward, then there are wall broken, and overall students have a good experience. And yeah, so about the strategy and how do we plan to go from here, I think Abhilasha is the one to answer it.
Yeah, Abhilasha, you've been called to answer.
Sure. I'll take the first crack, and then Raunaq should add in, of course, Professor Kaur will sort of, tie all the themes together. So I think a lot of our work is, Aashima, is honestly, we're sort of learning by doing and seeing what works best to see how do we take research and see how do you make it a part of truly long-term change, right? So some of our hypotheses getting in is that this needs to become codified. It needs to become a part of the institutions so that, we're able to ensure that these are long-term changes versus just, a burst of energy, which then very quickly dies down, right? So that's been one thesis that we're looking at. At a more macro level, we're also trying, and within that, one more thing that we're trying to see is what's the right mix of like going deep on certain themes versus going, trying many different things. How do we balance between quick wins versus long-term changes? And these are some things that we do and we sort of reflect on as well. And all of this then translates into an inclusion framework. Gender inclusion framework that across many themes, right? Like whether it's around themes like mentorship, whether it's around responsive infrastructure, what have been some of our learnings around taking research to action and what we think other institutions can sort of benefit from once they sort of try these things out. We I think want to avoid the reinvention of the wheel that often tends to happen, and we want this to be a long-term sort of change and figure out what works over there. So
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a key focus over the next year and a half to really try a lot, see what works, and make it part of the institution, and then also like zoom out and have a framework that other institutions could be building on and or also includes experiences from other places.
Right. Okay. Raunaq, your 1 minute.
Yeah, thanks, Aashima. So I think building on what Abhilasha said, we had also, as Abhilasha said, learning by doing. There are instruments of change which we are identifying, which we are tweaking. But more conceptually, I think the ambition is to have a sense of sensitivity to these issues, which is all encompassing. So this project also has a, of course, finite timeline, capacity, bandwidth, but we want more and more people to join with their capacities and energies. And it has happened very well in the past 3 to 4 years since the project started. There are offices which we have found great support in. There are people who have championed the cause. There are people who have started initiatives. And this is also in some ways what ends up mainstreaming the conversation of gender, because it can't be just like the 4 or 5 of us who are doing it. There have to be more people doing it in their rooms, in the classrooms, because what's most integral is that we bring students into the fold. And I think part of the process is pieces like this, conversations like this, and the research work when it comes out, because these become crucial conversation starters. As I said in the beginning, all of these things about gender, marginalization, inclusivity, they're always present. They essentially shape your experience and your identity. But a research group, a research piece, or a narrative piece for that matter, just allows you to talk about them with a very robust reference. So we are also hoping that the sensitivity percolates into student conversations and also into instruments of change, which Abhilasha very well structured. But yeah, that is the broad hope.
Yeah, and a good one. Ravinder, while you answer this, can I ask you that it will be so great if you can model your answer specifically to STEM? I mean, we're talking about IIT, which does, of course, technology and a lot of things, and we're talking about the humanities. But could you throw a light about why such work, this kind of approach is necessary specifically for the STEM community?
Just to first add a quick point to what my colleagues have already said. And the project is now, as you know, pivoting into policy and dissemination. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to shape policies out of our research, and also reach out to prospective policymakers like the Department of Science and Technology or the IITs Council, etc. Those people, if they adopt these policies, will have a STEM ecosystem-wide impact. So we are having an impact at the ground level at IIT Delhi, and hopefully the research will go out into the wider world, published within the next year, most of it hopefully, and that will have its own impact. But I think it's important to translate things into policy. Grassroots efforts are great, but they don't have a system-wide impact. So having said that, I think if it was not for the Humanities and Social Sciences department at IIT Delhi, and the fact that a previous director and the current director have reposed a lot of trust in us to carry out studies. Aashima, you know about the study that my department and I did in 2016, which showed that girls, irrespective of the marks and the JE rank they came on, performed at least a grade or a grade and a half better than the boys when they were exiting IIT. So this made everybody think about why there were lots of girls who qualified, but they did not join IITs. And some of the reasons were that IITs were some of the IITs they were getting admission to were too distant. Parents were worried about safety. Cost could be borne for sons, but not for daughters. So here I'm sort of saying that, a discipline like sociology is able to shed light on all this, societal processes, etc. Discipline like economics, experimental economics, other types, just landscaping the gender data for the future for other researchers to try and understand. So these can only be done from the humanities and social sciences departments. Understanding the students, the large body of BTech students, the problems that they are facing, whether it's isolation leading to suicides, etc. I think there is knowledge in these departments, and they are now being roped in, by the institutions also to help them to understand how to create a better environment, within their institutions for students to thrive. Raunaq mentioned our participatory exercise that we did to transform common spaces, because older IITs don't have the kind of common spaces where people can intermingle, whether of different genders or hierarchies across teachers and faculty. So I think these are skills and these are analysis that departments of humanities and social sciences are bringing to understanding the STEM ecosystem. I know, in the limited time we had, we could only do deep research on certain questions. So other last one thing that we are already reaching out to other institutes, for example, let's say IIT Jammu, IIT Indore, Laksha University, others, where we can already see that, there is some traction, interest in starting even Gati-like exercises of evaluating gender equity self-evaluation, which we did at IIT Delhi, as you know. So the idea is to try and bring about as much change as we can. And I think HSS departments can contribute very productively to this.
Yeah, they are the best place to do this kind of work. While in the STEM labs, there is work on molecules and energies and, robots and drones and no, I just meant I wasn't thinking about the killing drones. I was thinking about the famous IIT drones, IIT Delhi. So while that goes on, I think humanities really can do this thing that at Labhopping we've been calling for, this self-reflection, because only with that we can really work towards reforming our own practices that are so culturally rooted, and we're kind of dragging all of that into this like very objective, supposedly very objective and very pure environment. But I think these exercises and the kind of research questions you're taking up is really great to do that self-reflection, because we really do need it. With that, I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you for your comments, and I will go straight to Gauri because her question has been buzzing. Please, Gauri, ask the first question.
Yeah, thank you. So I had a question, like it's like two in one, but like it's sort of on, like you mentioned about like doing outreach to high school students, and also like I read your book on lab hopping. It is very nice, very nuanced, very nice. And like I also do astrophysics. I'm doing my master's right now, and like I read like about the ASI gender working group thing that they are doing, and the professor Preeti Kar told in that like they did put the statistics to astrophysicists, but they are not still ready to believe. So what do we do about that? Because I think it is the problem with sensitization of male students and not motivating female students, because I think they are very much motivated, but it is the insensitive behavior of female male colleagues. Yeah, so, like how is the, even in like high schools, I think the outreach has to be done with teachers who are to be sensitized over female students, because I think they are very much motivated. It is the teachers and the environment, and I think teachers are the one who should be sensitized. Like how are you like yeah, what about like you are also collecting data, but how like have you thought about how we should work about like sensitizing like how, because it is a difficult problem, so like
Sure.
how
Yeah.
how to work on that.
Ravinder, you want to quickly comment on that?
I just keep it short because I know we have only 15 or so minutes. You're absolutely right, Gauri, that we need to reach out to schools, families, because that's where gendering starts to happen. So gendered socialization, uh, cuts off women into, at the most, into biology or medicine, and not really into engineering and mathematics and physics and all. Although we have 52% women enrolled in science disciplines now, according to the All India survey, there are 30% in technology. So certainly science is seen as a very valuable first degree. But still, we see that gendering. We see that discipline gendering later on also, when more and more women move into biology and bio-related disciplines like biotech and biomed and all that. And men move into computer science and, all the very lucrative kinds of technology and engineering. That happens. So I think I will not take too much time, but we have been making several efforts. I think many institutes now have these STEM mentorship programs for schoolgirls, rural, urban, and talking to those groups of people. But you're absolutely right that, teachers are the ones also who need to be sensitized, because female teachers are also tell girls that you should do biology and tell boys that, you should aim for engineering. So a program for teachers, I think, is equally important. It has been suggested, but we do have these groups of students coming to the IIT Delhi campus, and we find that we are able to at least sensitize them, their teachers, their parents. And we do see a change, so now we are going to track these students, our program, as to where they end up. And just coming into an IIT for a mentorship program is so transformative for them. And also the supernumerary seat scheme. I think the more that it can be publicized, especially we know that the women are doing as well as the men, so why they shouldn't be there in engineering, one doesn't understand. So the more people know, the more I think parents also will be willing to send their daughters for coaching, which is unfortunately something that the system is unable to remove. Uh, so we are hoping, but you are absolutely right that there's gendered socialization and biases have to be addressed all along. And it is a Herculean effort.
Yeah. Right. Quickly to Patricia's question before we go to the next. Has the study considered the situation, needs of trans students, if such are recognized as a category or potential category? Please, very briefly, could somebody from StemTheGap respond?
Sorry.
Hi. Yeah, so actually, we have tried to be as inclusive as possible, but numbers and like that's an issue. So we have tried to be, try to interview and try to include them in studies. If that answers your question, but the numbers are few to begin with. So empirically, like analysis is difficult at
Right.
this stage of time.
So it comes out in some of the qualitative work that we are doing. And I also replied to Patricia in the chat that, IIT Delhi is the first institute to set up a Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And gender and sexuality are very much a part of that. And there is a very robust LGBTQ group on campus, which is led by a very able student, and events take place, etc. So a lot of sensitization is happening. The as Swati said, and earlier as part of the Gati project, we had done focus groups with different categories of students. I think someone in the chat had also asked the question about inclusivity in the studies in terms of intersectional identities of caste as well. So in the qualitative work, we are able to do that. In fact, even in the quantitative work of supernumerary seat scheme, it's showing that there is now much more robust inclusion of girls from disadvantaged castes. Earlier, there was a gender gap within the reserved category castes. Like many more boys would be able to come into IITs than girls. We find that gender gap is narrowing, especially among the SCs and the OBCs. And I think, so the scheme has been good in many ways. As was mentioned, we don't have the data where people have self-identified as non-binary or transgender. So we are unable to do that analysis. I'm sure that is something that over time, if we keep tracking statistics of these institutions, and I think that's very important, crucial, that should help.
Right. So, but currently, trans students at IIT, even though they are in the room, are not part of at least the quant studies. And I mean, Raunaq said baby steps, and I hope it doesn't just stay at that. That we can really include these voices and these experiences also across the board.
No, so I would, I'm sorry to interrupt, but no, it's not that they are not part of the quant study. They are part of the quant study. Everybody is welcome to participate. It's just that we don't have large enough numbers to carry out statistical methods on, like, to do statistical research on with those numbers.
Okay. Okay. Can I now ask Smita?
Smita, we can't hear you, Smita. We can't hear you. Although you,
We can't hear you, although you are not muted. We don't hear you. Maybe you can type your question, Smita. Don't hear you.
Or maybe we can go to Pooja and come back to Smita if she can fix her sound.
Sure, sure. Pooja, would you like to ask or comment?
Yeah, I actually I teach at IIT Bombay again in the Humanities and Social Sciences department, and Professor Kaur's work, the whole work that you guys have done is extremely important in current times. I briefly, because we have limited time, so I'll quickly come to the question. But I was thinking, or if you have done maybe part of your study, but you may not have been able to share with us, did you engage with something in terms of the behavioral inclusion that the students experience? Because at IIT Bombay, what I've heard from a lot of young BTech students is that whenever they stand for, if a girl stands for any POR, immediately 5 boys will stand to oppose her, even if they were not interested earlier. So that's not really inclusion, but it's creating a hurdle just because she's a girl. So if you did some kind of a study or did you do any intervention around that, I would really like to. Thanks.
You know, I'll say 2 sentences and then hand over to Raunaq because regarding this, actually some of my students in my ethnography class did a study on recent IIT Delhi elections and for PORs, etc., the positions of responsibility. And, you know, one, the huge gender imbalance, the fact that there's still 80% boys in the BTech degree and only 20% girls, and there will be like 2 hostels for girls and there'll be 12 for boys. That itself sets you know, the tone against girls. But what we found out that, you know, men also deploy other girls or their friends or friends of friends to vote against the female candidates who are anyway have a very tough time and persuade them to vote for male candidates. So it's a, I think, inclusion, as you rightly said, at various levels. In fact, this is also what we argue in our paper on supernumerary seats, that, you know, numerical inclusion has happened, but is there more substantive inclusion of girls in IIT happening, IITs happening? And so that is another reason why we are looking of various ways of addressing this, whether through campus layout shifts or, you know, mixing up girls and boys hostels and taking away all this, you know, these gender divides. But you're absolutely right. You know, IITs are very hierarchical, not only between genders, they are hierarchical even between first year, second year, third year, fourth year. Students tend to call each other sir and madam. So these are hierarchies that one has to break. But it's, we are not there yet, as you will know. I think, Raunaq, if you want to add something quickly, since you know the system from the inside, from the student perspective, and Abhilasha.
Yeah, I'll quickly add a couple of things, but you're very right, Professor Pooja, that so much, like, I think what Gauri also was hinting in her question, that there is inclusion, there are more women on campus because of supernumerary seats, but is there sort of this all-encompassing sense of a community that all different students come together, are there for each other? And when we look at it from that lens, there is a lot of segregation or sometimes biases or ideas. I think because in 2020, when I was in my third year at IIT Delhi, we had attempted a sort of look back at supernumerary, a very sort of formative one. And we spoke to a bunch of students before and after the sort of coming in of supernumerary seats. And what they told us was that before supernumerary, when we would attempt to go to a club or even stand for a PR, there was nobody, because numerically it was impossible to have sometimes multiple women. I mean, Abhilasha will attest to it. She has like a longer experience. Numerically, it was impossible to have more than one or sometimes two or three women in a club. That had started to just shift. Like, it was an incipient shift. I'm sure in qualitative studies, as Professor Kaur is saying, we've captured it more deeply. So one hopes that this trickles down in the coming years, that just by virtue of the numerical percentage, there is more confidence, there is greater representation. But again, these are all hopes we are keeping.
Yeah.
Abhilasha, if you want to, please.
Yeah, I think it was I mean, if I think back to a decade and a half ago, it was pretty hard. And I think a lot of that purely came to numbers. The numbers were really bleak in terms of like 8% overall, roughly, but in a lot of things like in certain departments, in certain extracurriculars, that percentage would have probably gone down to 3 to 4%, right? And it was a vicious cycle because the fewer people were there over years, it became like sort of like an assumption that this is just something women can't do. So I think I'm very hopeful that the shift in numbers will create change. But I think it's going to be a wait and watch to see on that. But I mean, I think like something that I always keep just so that you always have the positivity is like, it looks like a different campus. That's something I always say, which is like, I remember the ratio being drastically different.
I think it's just the research and the institute speaking the language of inclusion is a big service to start with, to start having this inclusivity really, I mean, it's just what we're looking at. Like, that is what humanities does. What are the questions it's asking is reflective of where we're going. So I think it will happen. I mean, maybe not organically, maybe we need more push and shove. But I think it is a start, and as Raunaq's words keep coming up in my head, baby steps, right? And it's frustrating. But I wanted to also ask Swati if you wanted to respond to that, or you have a totally different comment to make.
No, no.
Okay.
So I have a response to Professor Pooja's question that we just recently finished the field experiment where we are testing for leadership, like whether girls self-select themselves to be a leader, and if they are the leaders, then what is the attitude of the team members. So we designed this huge study, and hopefully by July we'll have some results to share with everybody, like the attitudes that girls and boys have towards their leader, and how does that vary systematically with the gender of the leadership, whether females self-select themselves to be leaders, in what situation. So like we varied the gender ratio, and so there are very lot of interesting analysis planned in that study. And with that, apart from that, my colleague Ankita, she did a scoping study on entire this leadership, like hostel elections and everything, and she found out that the same concept as Pradhan Pati, that if some female is standing, she's usually bagged by boys, and the boy the boyfriends or friends, and their networks will wait for. So like women, they are just there on face. So that also happens a lot. Like that's what Ankita found out, and if she's there, she can also throw light on like this.
I'm going to move on now because we are losing numbers. We are at 25, so I think it's gone a bit longer now. But I do want to take a few more questions. I wanted to ask if Smita, now, does it work? Can you try?
Hi, am I audible now?
Yes, you
Yeah.
are.
Okay, great. Just in case it didn't work, I had typed in my question into the chat as well. Okay, so I started Monkey Shanti and I work in mental health, and I have worked with a number of IIT and IT campuses so far. Even with that, I also trained at Enhance here, and one of the modules that I have been including is gender and sexuality, because it is a big part of what affects mental health at that age. In any case, thank you for sharing the paper, Two Campuses in One. That's a very lived experience for me. I went to IIT Madras and I was an undergraduate student in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. That program has been discontinued, so we go back to having no undergraduate courses in social sciences at IITs as of now, that I know of. From that, I'd like to know, and this is based on my experience as a student, before the supernumerary scheme was introduced, was or were campuses prepared infrastructurally to accommodate more women than were there? So for instance, my experience comes from when we were in college, we did not get single rooms till our fourth year, whereas all the boys got single rooms in their second year. And that's because there was just no space, right? So there were three of us stuffed in a double room for 2 to 3 years. And that's awful when you think about it in terms of mental health. There's absolutely no privacy, and it's not just for a year, it's basically most of college life. So that's where my question is coming from. Was the infrastructure prepared to even accommodate the increasing number of women, or was it's something ad hoc, like, okay, let the women come, then we'll see what happens?
Ravinder, please.
So, when the scheme was announced and it was to be rolled out, it was rolled out in a phased manner. So they didn't say, you start adding 20% girls right away. And one of the big reasons for that was the shortage of girls' hostels. And I don't know about the other IITs, but at least IIT Delhi tries to ensure that each and every girl who is enrolled gets a room, even if it's shared, on campus. So over a period of time now, a third girls' hostel has been added. And, at that time, something called the Nalanda flats, which were meant for visiting faculty, were turned into accommodation for girls. So various jugaad types of things were done. But I think now, that the numbers are there and they have to accommodate them. So I think infrastructure needs to be forward-looking in many ways, because we also see a demographic shift in IITs where younger couples are coming who have children. I'm talking about faculty, and I'm also talking about female PhD students with children. So we need to project, in the next 10 years, how much of daycare is going to be needed, how many creches are going to be needed. And most institutes are not thinking about these things because that gender sensitivity in a gender lens on infrastructure and campus design is simply not there. So that is another lens that, design and spatial studies and all need to bring to engineering institutes. You're absolutely right about toilets being available only on alternate floors. And that's the first thing many faculty in engineering disciplines say, that they look around and there's no toilet, accessible toilet. So we address many of these issues in the Gati report that we did. Happy to share a copy of it with you if you'd like to. So this is the thing that we're talking about, that unless you talk about these issues, unless there is a voice, that people are voicing these needs and in fact, many professors and many students have said, you need to ask for what you need. Otherwise, nobody is going to provide it without your asking. But you're also right that, girls tend to come from closer to the catchment areas of the IITs, simply because parents we found out those 2-3 things, that there is some preference in the country, and parents are willing to spend as much as they need to on sons, sending them to the best IIT. But for girls, they'll say, come on, you can go to an NIT near the house or a private college or do something else. And then gendering of disciplines. So if a girl is getting mechanical engineering, they would say, no, 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 this is not appropriate. So a whole host of things account for the fact that girls end up choosing educational institutions near their homes, even if they are qualifying for an IIT. Yeah, Aashima,
Thank you.
back to you.
Yes. So we're almost out of time, 4 minutes beyond what I had planned, but there are 2 questions still remaining. I will read the input from Arya, and they have asked a question, but I think it's also a comment. And they are saying that in an early work on her experience in IITs, Shayanika Shah had coined a term called IIT female, who is described as someone subscribing to the more masculine traits to be taken seriously, which can be looked at as a commentary on the masculine affinity of the environments. Did you find anything similar in your study where the prioritization of masculine thinking, whatever that is, I really don't know what masculine thinking refers to, doing and being in science have an influence on how the gender is performed within the academic boundaries? Does our infrastructure or the lack of infrastructure call us to, perform a more masculinized form of gender? Raunaq, Swati, or Ravinder, or somebody in the audience would like to
I mean, if
comment.
Raunaq would like to take a shot at it, or Abhilasha, if not, then I'll, or Swati, if not, then I'll respond to it.
I think it's on you, Ravinder.
Okay, so, I know Chayanika Shah talked about IIT female, but what Abhilasha and Raunaq will also be familiar with is that the women were called IIT, they were called non-males, so they weren't called females, and it was really belittling, and very, very discriminatory, or I don't know what to call it. It was terrible. And there would be this whole comparison with girls who are within IITs, because that's also sometimes an image that goes with the nerd image, or with science and technology. Unfortunately, what happened in the US, where women all dropped out of computer science because of the nerd image, that did not happen in India. Because in India, people feel, okay, computer science is great for women, comparison with mechanical engineering and civil engineering, because they can sit in an office and do all their work. So no more challenges that men face. But it is true that, both in leadership and at the student level, in order to succeed, sometimes people have to join the boys club, and sometimes they have to take on those masculine, performatory characteristics. Because if you are tough, you are a bitch, sorry to say that, on thing. And if you are soft, then you are timid, you're not good enough, you're not going to make it in any way. So I think that is very much an experience that women used to have, having been there long enough. But I think that is also, beginning to change now. That is also beginning to change now. With more girls there, I see a lot more self-confidence in girls. They're also willing to put up a fight. They're willing to perform their authenticity, whatever gender they might be. Uh, Even in leadership, there is a debate going whether women really need to adopt masculine models of leadership, or can they be successful being who they are, which is often collaborative and cooperative, etc. So I think some of you are familiar with the gender and science and technology literature, will know that many people talk about gendered ways of thinking, where men are more abstract and logical and all, and women are the opposite of all those ways of doing things and also thinking. But those binaries have been challenged. They are socially constructed. They are not at all inherent to either, any gender. So having said that, yes, we are hoping we get past those experiences in very masculine institutes.
Yeah. Raunaq, you're responding to the same?
Yeah, I just had a very small thing to add. I was just thinking, as Professor Kaur was saying, I think like the supernumerary scheme is very recent. It came about in 2018. The ratio has only just improved. But the dominant ethos of an IIT remains unfortunately very masculine, in the sense that the more, I mean, just in terms of course, the number of women, the sheer, the number of men, there are much, much more. Also in terms of the leadership, but also the thinking, policies, and even how maybe pedagogies are structured, how, let's say, aspirations are structured. Because in a lot of these institutes, things often repeat themselves in a cycle. It's like you enter and you know what it is that you're expected to do. And those
Yeah.
expectations have been long set, and they unfortunately were set when the discourse and the demographic were completely different. But they continue. They are changing, as Professor Kaur said, and we also see them changing. Like when we even put up something as simple as a whiteboard on International Women's Day, we see a lot more outpouring of expression. So there is a lot more self-expression. There is a more agency, and in leadership there are more women. But yes, I think the road from having a masculine ethos to, let's say, a feminist ethos someday in IITs is a long one. So yeah, that road.
Yeah. Again, I want to stress that whatever that is, like there is a lot of like pondering over what is a masculine ethos, what is a feminine ethos. Like the aim here really, while we're talking about gender, is to, like Ravinder said, to challenge all of that binaries. I want to take the last question. Thanks for everyone for your comments. Like some of the questions I haven't read, and I think read out loud, because I think if you read the two um, links we've shared for the lab hopping articles, and if you go through the StemTheGap website, maybe we can put those links again towards the end. Raunaq, if you could help me. You will get your answers. So the only question that's remaining in the chat now I wanted to ask is Patricia's question, who compliments that this is a very well conceived and executed project. Are there comparative studies of other co-ed institutions? I know you are thinking of, yeah, of other roping in other institutes, but have you worked with the data of other institutes in collaboration?
There are more publications on the IITs. I have not seen any on the IITs or ICERs, and even there have been older publications on the Indian Institute of Science, which it's been as male dominated, we know. But there is quite a bit of work now emerging on the IITs, both quantitative and qualitative. So that's good to see. But we don't see any, studies. But then ours was a long 5-year project. We don't see anything similar, but we hope that, many of these studies will get replicated in other institutions. And if things are different elsewhere, then that should emerge. If they're very similar, then strengthens the case for the interventions that we will be proposing. I think Patricia also asked the question whether these the disciplines of the humanities and social sciences are just an add-on, which is a question that many people ask, and or there are majors. So many IITs, not IIT Delhi as yet, have started BTechs or BS programs, which combine humanities, social sciences, and engineering. We ourselves in our department now have 3 master's programs, one on cognitive science, one on society, culture, and thought, and one on economics. Economics is also running minor. So I think these institutes are now expected also by the NEP to turn into more like universities and have more disciplines. But I think, the integration is Raunaq and Abhilasha and all, and the current students have to take at least 4 courses from our department to graduate. The original vision was that these are not add-ons, they are not service departments. So you teach philosophy, you teach philosophy. You teach literature, you'll teach literature. But now we find that many hybrid courses are emerging, which also address, tech and science more centrally, whether it's through policy or other kinds of courses. So I think it's the evolution of these departments in the last 10, 15 years. With now, some of the older IITs have 40 students, 40, sorry, faculty. And this time, I think we've got like 3,000 PhD applications or something for the department. So there is a more of an interest. A lot of good publications are coming out of these departments. Many of which are beginning to reflect on our own situation.
Yeah. I wanted to add on the comparative studies. We didn't get to it, but Gati would be a great topic to do that kind of work. And I think I want to do this work. I want to look at all the Gati reports and I want to do a comparison because I think it's not enough to just do it at IIT Delhi, right? If our aim is to really bring about a change and a real inclusion that Pooja asked for, I think we're going to have to scale it up and the things that Abhilasha has been working on. Yeah, so I want to say let's start somewhere. Let's collaborate more. I'm hoping that this comparing the Gati reports will be a class project, a lab hopping project in the future, and we will do it in collaboration definitely with StemTheGap, hopefully, and get that know-how and do some pieces, some outreach based on what was really found. Because I think now we've had this women in science discussion for so many years and these initiatives, and really now we're all kind of frustrated why, even though it looks different, why we don't feel the difference, right? And I want to say thanks and close this discussion. I want to also briefly talk about lab hopping and the projects that we're doing currently. Besides this series, we were also involved in and continue to do so of archiving of the science discussions that happened in early Mangalore. That's something we're doing with NCBS Archive. So that's one of our current projects. And we're writing, of course, many proposals, one on biodiversity research in India, one on conferences in India, science conference in India. So I know we're writing different proposals here and there, and we're hoping that, all the amazing work that's happening on the ground can really reach and we can really come together like we did today and flesh these out. And I hope all of you are taking something that you learned, that you has been novel and interesting. And thanks a lot, the panelists. Thank you, Ravinder. Thanks, Raunaq, Abhilasha, and Swati, and all your questions and your comments. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aashima, for helping this and organizing it all. Thank you so much.